Blue White Breakdown is back. I'm joined by Max Ralph. I'm Bob Flounders. We are in midway through June, Max, and there's a lot to get to when it comes to Penn State and recruiting. They've been very busy, been very successful. They've had people up there. They're going to have more people up there. There are Penn State targets that are shortly will be making their verbal announcements. Penn State is killing it on the recruiting trail. It seems like every year they're getting more athletic and larger humans on campus.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's just kind of the way it is in college football. But it's just amazing, like, just how crazy recruiting is and how detailed it is and getting people up there. And credit James and his staff. I know they had a huge weekend this past weekend. I also wanted to get your thoughts on a Penn State defender that you've written about, that I've thought about a lot lately with some news about a Penn State injury, because I think he has now become a guy coming off an injury who is going to be very critical to Penn State's run back to the college playoff. But Max, I haven't talked to you in a while. How you been? Your Cubs are tearing it up. You have to be happy about that.
I was going to say, Bob, you opened this thing with the Blue White Breakdown is back, but I think the better way to open it would have been Bob Flounders is back, because it's been quite a while since we've seen your face and heard your voice. So it's great to have you back.
I like to give the viewers, not so much the listeners, the viewers, a break from seeing my face, because it's not really, I don't think it's ideal for them. Like, if they were smart, they'd probably just listen to me. But it's good to be back. This is the runway where Penn State reporters, pretty much June and July are, if you have time to take, pretty much, if you have any left, you better take it now, because once it starts, it's a full go sprint. And the way that Penn State's playing last year and this year, it's a sprint to probably the middle of January if they get to where they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned my Cubs. They are absolutely tearing it up. A couple of games a little too close with the Pirates over the weekend, but I can't complain. And, I'm looking forward to it. I've gotten to see them at a bunch of new places this summer. So I've crossed a few new parks off the list. So that's been great. Camden Yards, most recent over this past season. That was
fantastic.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah. Max, I'll just say this. I'm kind of really hoping that the Cubs and the Phillies are on a collision course at some point in October, just because there is a large section of Penn State beat reporters who are obsessed with the Phillies, and we'll go to some of those games, including Johnny McGonigal, but it'll get a little bit chirpy, I think, at availabilities, and also on a weekend if it's a Phillies Cubs best of 7, best of 5, whatever it is. But they're certainly trending in the right direction of there's a good chance they might see each other when it really counts.
Yeah, I'm dreading it, because the Phils have really had the Cubs number over the past few years. So I'm really not hoping for that. But even though I think the Cubs are probably the better team overall, they just can't beat them for some reason. So really not hoping for that.
Looking forward to it. All right, Max, let's get to the recruiting first. I know you previewed kind of how big Penn State's weekend was. They had some very, very talented prospects up there. Do you have any takeaways, or did you glean anything from maybe how things went for James Franklin, his assistant coaches, and the prospects they covet?
Yeah, so it was a big weekend. Johnny and I really, really hit it hard on some of the really big names that were there on Thursday. But coming out of it, I think it's hard not to be pleased as a Penn State fan with, the follow-up from the 5-star offensive lineman Immanuel Iheanacho, the big man out of Baltimore, a Georgetown prep, really good prospect, top 10 player in the country, at a position where Penn State has 4 returning starters this year. He certainly could slot in and play next year if they were able to close the deal on this. He posted a photo on Twitter of him holding a #committed sign, which was a tease. He did not commit. He said, I feel a lot better about this now. And I think that going into the weekend, the sentiment was really that Penn State was trailing behind a couple of big schools for his services heading into the OV. And it's always good news that when you at least get the OV, if you come out of it and you're still a part of that group. So his recruitment has been a wild one. We mentioned it on Thursday, kind of started out, it looked like Maryland was, a really safe bet for him to stay home. and now it's Oregon, and LSU's in there as well. He's got a top four that doesn't even have Maryland anymore. So this one could take some turns, but the good news is it certainly seems like Penn State helped themselves over the weekend, which late in the cycle as he approaches a commitment sometime in the next few months. I think it's good news. There's also another offensive lineman who's a little more under the radar, Charlie Tom out of Avon Old Farms Prep in Connecticut. Was on campus a week after getting his offer from Penn State. And I got to say, I was a little surprised. Usually when something like that happens, when you get the offer and then you're back on campus for an OV the very next weekend, I feel like a lot of times that results in a commitment. It didn't here. I don't know if that's not good news for Penn State. I mean, like I said, he's an under the radar prospect. There's still some really big names that Penn State is holding on to at the offensive line position with Iheanacho, Grayson McKeo, who Johnny's done a lot of work on PennLive, if you want to go check that out. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting weekend, but maybe a little bit surprising considering how red hot Penn State had been through the April and May months. Not a whole lot of movement this weekend or really over the past week or two. So I think there was some big things, especially with Iheanacho, because I like anytime you can be in position for a top 10 player in the country, that's good news. I'm not by any means saying that he's going to commit anytime soon or that he will commit when he eventually makes his decision. But I do think that it's positive feedback, at least from this weekend.
Yeah, that Tom kid. There's also a connection there with he went to a school that Owen Alicini or Aliciani.
I think it's either Alicini or Alicine.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, he is a guy that Penn State already likes in his first year, and this Owen and Charlie, same school, so that's usually a pretty good sign. That's usually not a bad sign at all. So, and also Connecticut. I saw that there's a California running back, and then there's yet another tight end.
Yeah.
Shocker on Penn State's radar.
Yeah. Yeah. So the tight end position is an interesting one because Penn State's had a couple of guys that were, high on their board for a while. Like Max Sutter comes to mind from Illinois. He was a guy that Ty Howell had visited a few times over at his place, and a bigger name in this cycle that ended up not taking a visit to Penn State. There's been a couple of stories like that where Penn State's gotten in with bigger name tight ends, and then things fizzled out. The thing to keep in mind, of course, is like Luke Reynolds is still a sophomore. Andrew Rappleyea is going to have, I believe, 3 more years of eligibility, if not 4, because of the injury.
Yeah,
he's just signed 3 tight ends in the past class. Like, tight end very much is not a priority right now, but there was another one on campus in Braden Fogel from Ohio, who is a fairly recently offered prospect as well. So, we'll see how that one goes. That one could be tough to, it's never easy to pull Ohio prospects away from the Buckeyes if they're worthy of a Buckeyes offer. But Penn State tried this weekend, and there's still another one. Minnesota tight end Pierce Peterson is planning to come to campus here in the near future. I would say that tight end is just not the priority in this class. I think that there are priority recruits out there, priority targets, but it's certainly just not as important as other positions in this class because of the unbelievable depth that Penn State has on the roster already.
Talking Penn State football recruiting in mid-June, although it doesn't really feel like mid-June because it's like 60 degrees out, but what are you going to do? I just saw it by the end of the weekend. It's going to be 90, so I am going to shut up about the nice weather. I could just do without the rain. Max, we talked recruiting. I know you and Johnny, when I was away, got to go up to meet with James Franklin and his assistant coaches. It was a smorgasbord of availability, and probably the last availability, unless something was scheduled, until James and his assistants reemerge in either July at Big Ten Media Days or August Media Day for us. But that's still a ways off. But I know that you guys, I've been following along. You guys have gotten a lot of good info. You had a chance to talk to a lot of. I mean, the staff is so good that when you get the availability, like everyone's almost, you want to try and talk to everyone because they're all doing such a great job. I can't imagine there's very many better staffs in the country. One thing that caught my eye, you had a story on a defender we're going to get to, but I did see that the new DC at Penn State is raving about the true freshman corner, Darius Dixon, who had a lights out performance in the blue-white game we were all impressed with him when we saw him in the game, and it really does. It feels to me like, I know it's a deep room, but they're going to find a way to get that guy on the field. He's just too good to not have him on the field.
Yeah, without a doubt. I personally did not get a chance to talk to Jim Knowles
Mm-hmm.
while we are at the availability over there, but there is absolutely no reason not to be excited about Dixon.
Yeah.
Because he was on the field in that blue-white game, laid the boom. We've talked about that. He had that massive hit. For him, it was always just kind of a matter of how quickly he could, learn the playbook and kind of adjust to the speed of the Big Ten, because he had the size from day
Yep.
one. He came in looking like a Division I corner, immediately, and no surprise because Mater Dei is such a good program out there in California. But the question was just how quickly he could get up to speed. Was he quick enough to play corner at the Big Ten level? And I think we saw in the blue white game that he absolutely is. He's quick enough. He's strong enough. He's going to be on the field. But I do think that the good thing for him and for
Yeah.
Penn State is that he doesn't have to be on the field. There's 3 or 4 corners ahead of him that Penn State's really comfortable with, that he can learn from and also take some pressure off of, like, when he's on the field. Maybe it's in the third quarter with a 2-score lead already. It'll be a good situation for the rookie to get some experience.
Yeah. I'm also excited. I'm also glad that Darius enrolled early,
Mm-hmm.
because now he's already gotten a taste of a state college winner. And I don't mean to sound like, but it's kind of a big deal, especially if you're from the West Coast. You have to be sure what you're getting into. It sounds
That's
like he
right.
survived it just fine. And when November and December roll around this year, there will be no shocks. His blood will already be starting to thicken, and he won't be like, man, I need to get back to Cali.
My favorite story that we just got this past year that I've probably said on a podcast already, don't remember, like Zane Durant. I mean, Penn State pulls so many kids from Florida,
Yeah.
and has for the past few years. But Zane Durant, we talked to him in the lead up to the playoff, and we've talked to him a few times as well about, the young defensive tackle Randy Adarica, who's coming from Florida as well. And Zane was talking, and he's like, well, I'm finally kind of used to the winters here. But I learned the hard way. Like, I now know what black ice is. And we all kind of looked at him and were like, Zane, did you fall? Like, did you land on your butt in state college? And he said, yeah, man, I took a bad spill my freshman year. So there's an adjustment to be made. And Zane is not willing to pass that newfound wisdom onto any of the young guys. He has told us multiple times he will not warn Randy Adarica or any of the Florida freshmen about black ice or about state college winters. It's for them to figure out on their own the way he did.
Yeah. I don't blame him. I mean, it's trial by fire. You gotta learn. And they probably wouldn't believe him anyway if he told them that. So why not get the baptism that eventually is coming? Matt, speaking of Penn State's defensive line, you had a story on PennLive. There was I think, very, very significant offseason news about Max Granville, long-term injury, which almost always means you're not going to probably see him in 2025. That's just been the way that it's gone. Significant injury. I saw that you wrote about Zuriah Fisher. Max, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 on the significance, with 10 being a huge deal and 1 being where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 with the Granville injury? I consider it to be extremely, extremely significant, because while they do have some young players they really like inside and outside, there's really no substitute for experience. There just isn't. Even a guy like Zane Durant and even Deny, they were behind some really good players. That's true freshmen, but you just wonder what their impact would have been if they needed to be guys that were going to play 30 or 40 snaps. I think this is a pretty big deal, and I do think that Zuriah Fisher, who has had some significant injuries at Penn State already, now is really in a prominent role, and they just can't have too many more injuries along the defensive line, especially if they're planning on playing 16, 17, 15 games.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I would probably put the Granville injury at maybe an 8, in the range of an 8,
Yeah,
because if he wasn't going to be the quote unquote starter
yeah,
alongside Denai Dennis Sutton, he was going to play a whole heck of a lot on the defensive end this year. And like you said, just not a lot of experience. I think I noted it in that story about Zuriah, and also in a story, the day after Granville's injury. They're looking at about 400 total snaps played in the rest of, obviously not including Deni Dennis Sutton because
Yeah.
he's played a ton, but beyond him, without Granville, there's about 400 snaps played among all those guys, and 330 of those are a guy who has missed 2 entire seasons with injury in his career.
Yeah.
So Zuriah Fisher is a huge piece of this because he's the only veteran. He's the only guy that has significant experience. He's the only guy that, it doesn't need to necessarily develop on day one in fall camp. He really just needs to stay healthy. The reviews have always been good on him. 2 years ago, he was in a rotational role for Penn State, and did some nice things 2 years ago when he was healthy. But even then, I mean, he was behind the likes of Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac. Like, those two guys were really good, and Zuriah Fisher was not asked to do a whole lot. This year, he's going to be asked to be a starter, guaranteed. I think that my confidence in Zuriah Fisher has increased over the past few weeks. I think the fact that he made it through the entirety of spring ball as a full participant the whole time was just a huge step. I mean, it's almost unfair to a guy to say like the whole key for him is literally just practicing every day. But when you've had 2 season-ending injuries in the past 3 years, that's kind of how it goes. And I think that I'm confident that he can perform. I'm not sure he's as good as, this number 2 defensive end that Penn State has had in the past years. I mean, last year, DDS was the number 2. Adisa Isaac was the number 2 to Chop for
Yeah.
how long? I mean, you could argue that those guys were 1A, 1B, but like, I'm not sure if Zuriah can be that good. Maybe he can be. We just haven't seen it yet. I'm not sure that he needs to be with how good the secondary is this year, with how good, the linebacking core could be with the addition of Amari Campbell. But he has to be healthy and he has to play a lot. And then they need, a guy like Jalen Harvey for sure, and Malachi Williams to step up. The name Ivan Camacho has popped up a lot in circles with, us reporters, Johnny and I, and as well as my conversations with Deion Barnes from a couple weeks ago. But Zuriah is a really interesting one, coming from Aliquippa. That is a program that Penn State has targeted for years and years and years. It's a really good high school football program in the WPIAL, and those kids usually come in ready. Zuriah came in more of a linebacker, and they put him down at D end right away, and he's finally going to have a chance to show it off. And he's certainly going to be, I think, outside of the wide receivers, which are always going to be a story until they make themselves not a story. Like, Zuriah might be number 2 on the list of guys to watch this year.
Yep, Max. The good news for Penn State, 2 things. With their offense and their offensive line and their running game, I mean, as explosive as the running game could be, it also could control games. And they could maybe keep the ball a little bit longer than they have in the past. I know they want to score quickly, but if they can keep the ball for 33, 34 minutes, having your defense on the field, not a lot, that helps with all of that. The other thing is, I know you've talked about it. I've talked about it with Johnny McGonigal. Those first 3 games it's a nice little runway for the young defensive ends to get some playing time, because let's not beat around the bush. It would be stunning if Penn State doesn't roll in all 3 of those games, and they can really, really take a long look at some defensive ends and get them up to speed, because after those first 3 games, I believe it's a bye, and then the season gets really, really, really serious with the Ducks coming in for the whiteout game. So there is a path where they can really evaluate some of these players they really like and get them in games because of how the schedule sets up. It's not like they're going at West Virginia in week 1 or, hosting West Virginia in week 1. So I think that is good news. But, at some point, whether it's Jalen Harvey or Williams, there's going to be 2 or 3 names we're going to be talking about a lot in October once the Big Ten season starts. But they have to flash first.
They do. And I think, one of the things that kept coming up when I talked with Deion Barnes for about 10 minutes 2 weeks ago, I think he said 2 or 3 times, we're going to have guys that are able to fit different roles this year, which really piqued my interest. Like, they could have, last year, Granville, because they were trying to redshirt him and he was still getting up to speed, like, they kind of kept him only in pass rush situations. But that held true even down the playoff run when he was number 2 on the depth chart behind Abdul Carter, but that was only for third down packages.
Yeah.
this year they don't have the Abdul Carter. Could that be Malachi Williams is in there on third downs in obvious passing situations, like just let the guy get after the passer? It could even be Kamaju, the freshman coming in. It could be Daniel Jennings, the early enrollee who already has a body that's in good shape. And that applies too for Barnes, what he said. That applies as well to a defensive tackle, where they're about 3 deep right now with Durant, Xavier Gilliam, and assuming a healthy Alonzo Ford once we get into the season. They'd like to be 4, 5, or 6 deep there, and those other pieces could come from different situations, whether it's a DeAndre Cook, a Caleb Artis, a Ty Blanding, Owen Wafel, whoever it is. But we really could be seeing more names across the defensive line this year than I think we have in the past few years.
Yeah, Max, and it's funny that you brought up Alonzo Ford. Him and Zuriah and he are kind of in very similar situations in that they are now being counted on, but they both dealt with really serious injuries. Yeah. So it's just funny for a team that is being talked about as a legit national championship contender, potential Big Ten champion. Maybe this is the year they win at Ohio State. It's a little fragile. That's how I pronounce it. Not fragile. A little fragile at the defensive line, and two really key guys that maybe won't be great stats, but two guys that are supposed to play a lot of snaps. I think Penn State fans should maybe be holding their breath with these two guys because they've been hurt before, and they're going to need these guys to play much bigger roles.
Yep, I'm with you. Ford's another guy like Fisher, like you said, that's had 2 season-ending injuries in his career. Last season, his first taste of Big Ten play. James Franklin continually called him a pleasant surprise. We know that he's been running behind the scenes. It's a good step toward being back with what appeared to be a lower body injury last year. But he's got to be there in camp on day one, because the defensive line is now we still got to see the linebackers play, but I think it's fair to say defensive line, not for lack of talent and potential, but just for lack of experience, is one of the bigger concerns on the roster right now.
Yeah, especially since Penn State added the Campbell kid from North Carolina, yes. Right? If they had gone into the year with, it's just Rojas and Dom, and they really like Specca and they like some young guys, but little green there. But I think with Campbell in the fold, I think I would agree with you. I don't know which is more critical, defensive end or defensive tackle. I'm just going to tell you this. In my opinion, if you're looking at Penn State's potential Achilles heel, if they're in a game in the fourth quarter and it's a 1-score game where either they're leading or they are behind, and they're facing a Big Ten team that can run the ball late in the game, this is where that could really show up. The front seven having to defend the run late in a game, and they have some outstanding individual talent, but they're a little bit thin. And can they get off the field? Can they get off the field if it's a close game? And I think that's the scenario for me that gives me the most pause when I think about Penn State potentially losing some games and even losing a game that no one sees coming if the defensive line is a little bit short and just not ready to go. I mean, in late September against Oregon, I know it's the whiteout, and I know Penn State's is really talented, but that's the path that could lead to trouble for Penn State. Max, before I let you go here on our blue-white breakdown reunions, I haven't talked to you in a while. I keep seeing for the stories you put on PennLive, I think it's DraftKings. It's posting like Penn State's regular season win total. I think it's 10.5. I think I just saw it when I was reading your recruiting story. So for this past weekend. So where are you on that side of it? Over 10.5, under 10.5 regular season wins, or do you just are you still marinating on maybe where you think Penn State will be at the end of the regular season?
Well, let me say this. Let me preface this by saying it is still June 16th.
Yeah.
This could absolutely change. But if you're asking me right now, I'm going over. I think it's 11 wins this year.
So that would be 11. That would not count the Big Ten title game. That would count. You're saying
regular season.
Minimum 11-1, and dare we say, is the number 12 on the table?
It's absolutely on the table. I just think when you look at the two games that are presumably going to cause problems in Ohio State and Oregon, those two rosters lost so much this offseason.
Yeah.
It's hard to not look at those right now before we've seen anything in fall camp, before we've seen any potential injuries that could come out for Penn State, for Ohio State, for Oregon, for whoever. When you look at the rosters on paper, there's just more experience on Penn State's side than there is in those other spots. And that could even boil down as shallow as Drew Aller is a senior quarterback, and those two schools are starting quarterbacks that have never started before.
Mm-hmm.
It could potentially be that simple. That negates everything of playing in a whiteout for Oregon or Penn State playing at the shoe. But I just think on paper on June 16th, I'm willing to say over 10.5 wins.
Max Ralph, it is June 16th. It's 12:34 p.m. I'm telling the Penn State fans, and I am putting you down on June 16th for a 12-0 Penn State regular season. No, I'm just kidding.
It's convenient, Bob, that you haven't said whether you're going
over. I err on the side of caution. I just laid out a scenario that gives me a little bit of pause. And look, if Penn State stays healthy, but that's the thing though. Penn State is not. I don't think I'm overstating it. Nobody stays completely healthy, and it's just a question of where will their depth be tested. If they get an injury on the offensive line, I think, if they get an injury at tight end, if they get an injury even at wideout, it's just, to me, I think it's, just like you saw, Rucci step up last year, just like you saw, Luke Reynolds emerge when Rappleyea went down early in the year. I mean, they are built and they are experienced at a lot of the right spots. They have a great staff. You can't tell me there's a better DC OC pairing than what Penn State has. And that does mean the world. But I'm telling you, and I think Penn State fans will probably say I'm negative. If anyone of note gets hurt along the defensive line, things could come apart pretty quickly. And I know they're still a good team, but there's just not a lot there. So that is my concern, and it's hard for me to say over 10.5 until I hear some people talking more about maybe what some of these young D tackles and defensive ends have been doing in August practices. Is it a cop-out? Probably. But honestly, I would probably go closer to 10-2 for a regular season right now than I would for 11-1 or possibly 12-0. And that's my reason.
Interesting. Fair enough. And again, it's June 16th, so we got some time to change those.
Okay, Max. Well, I think that's it for this blue-white breakdown. I believe you and I might be up for another one on Thursday. Our Johnny McGonigal is getting ready to leave the country on vacay, I have been told. And it sounds like it's going to be a hell of a vacation, but I'll let him talk about it. But I think we might be doing a doubleheader. It might be a Monday, Thursday. I know you got some baseball experience last weekend with the prep playoffs, and you saw a hell of a game that just did not go a local team's way. But I'm invoking the possibility of a Bob Max blue-white breakdown doubleheader on Thursday live. What say you, Max?
Yeah, I think it's going to be you and me rocking for a little while, Bob. I think you and I are tasked with a lot of pods here, just like Johnny and I were over the last few weeks. Nothing wrong with it, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, the people are going to pick your brain on the live session on Thursday. So.
Well, there's not much. I mean, I think they would probably say there's not a lot to pick at when you're talking about my brain, but I welcome any and all questions, comments, if it's possible. You're going to be hosting it. I'm looking forward to that. But that's it for the Monday, June 16th version of the blue-white breakdown here in 60-degree weather. I think when we do it again on Thursday, it might be closer to 90-degree weather. But just remember, Penn State fans, somebody on this podcast thinks Penn State as of now.